Hello, everybody.
Hello, welcome.
We are live. We are recording. Anything you say can and will be held against you. Totally kidding. Yo, Emma from Bridgewater. I was gonna prepare some really cool British accent because I've been practicing to impress Emma today, but it's not gonna happen. Um, so we're just really excited. I think we're waiting for or hoping that one more person can log in. She was having some technical difficulties, and so she may join us. But otherwise, we are here. So what we want to encourage you to do is use the chat feature. We are reading that and incorporating that into our discussion today. In fact, that's a critical component for what we are doing because this conversation is really for you and about you. And while Elatia and I have lots to say all the time, just ask us. What we really want to do is engage with you and make sure that this conversation is relevant to what's happening in your world and what you've experienced. So thank you for being here. And today we get to discuss probably, I don't know, for me, Elatia, I don't know where it falls in your list, but for me, it's probably one of my top 5 favorite books ever, which is saying a lot because #read all the books is kind of my motto in life. So the book is Reinventing Yourself by Steve Chandler. And gosh, I don't know, Elatia, what do you want to say about the book about Steve?
Yes, the book is also on my top 5 list, and that is also saying a lot from my corner as an avid reader. And I love this book, and I love Steve because both he in person and through this book awakens and helps us awaken our own possibility and potential. And I love the idea that there's always something more or better or more possibility, and not in a way that whatever isn't good enough, but rather in a way that incites creativity and possibility and growth. And that is exciting. And that's why I love this book so much.
Well, and that's why we're talking today, because it's about really just what's possible. What's possible for you, what's possible for me, what's possible for anyone when we kind of get inside of ourselves in such a way that we can kind of peel back the layers and ask some really significant questions about why am I doing what I'm doing to begin with? And what if I'm doing something I don't want to be doing? Is it possible for me to do something else or to show up in a completely different way? That's really what this is about. And so, but before we start, just a couple of things that Elatia and I were just talking about offline that we want to bring into the online arena. In our invitation and in our communication with each of you prior to you joining this webinar, we indicated that we would be discussing the main themes of this book. We would now like to renegotiate that agreement. After preparing and coming into this webinar, there's just so much inside of this book that we feel like we would be doing a disservice to each of you to simply, let's just, as fast as we can inside of an hour, cover the 4 main themes. Rather, what we would like to do is dive deep into the first theme and then plan some additional webinars to continue the discussion so that we really can fully explore all that this book has to offer. So if you guys could give us a hand raise, thumbs up, yes, we agree, then that's the way that we would like to proceed if everyone on the call is in agreement with that. The other thing is, as you're typing that, yes, yay. Okay, yay, thank you, everybody. The other thing is just be aware. What we do is we just like to be in this conversation and know that each of us do coaching individually one-on-one. Today's discussion may be sufficient for you. Great. If there's more that you want to discuss one-on-one later, just reach out to either one of us. It's fine. Or maybe that's it and there's nothing more that you want. That's also great. Good for you. Go create and keep being awesome. So let's kick this off and have a really fun conversation today. And Elatia, where do we start? If we're only focusing, because yay, we have now agreement from everyone, we're just going to focus on the first section. And by the first section, it's the one in the hard copy. Your digital versions are a little bit, they don't exactly sync with the written, all the information is still there. But the first section is called Owners of the Spirit. So that's really where we want to kind of hang out today in that discussion arena. Elatia, when you were rereading this for today's conversation, what was like the one thing that just jumped out at you right at the start?
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me right at the start, in fact, there were two. So I'm gonna take that and go with more than one. The first is how much power we actually have to create our reality, to create what happens in our lives, and to drive the kinds of outcomes that we want to have, whatever that means, not just at work or in professional lives, but all over in our existence. So this notion that we actually have the power to do that. And the related notion, or sort of the how that's underlying that, which is work or responsibility or discipline, the things that allow us to create, they're not actually the bad things. That's a false bill of goods that we've been sold. In fact, these are things that can be celebrated, especially because they're the things that create what we want to have. So those are the two big things that really jumped out at me from that first section.
Okay, so take us on a trip. Let's take the first one and let's just start peeling back that layer. Tell us a little bit more about why that resonates so much for you, and everybody on the call, jump in. And what I'd also like to know is, based on that first section, what are some things that are coming up for you if you've read the book? Because I want to be clear, you don't have to have read the book to participate in this conversation. So as we're talking, if things come up for you, experiences or things in yourself that you've seen, let us know. Let's talk about it. Make it about you. Otherwise, it could be very boring just hearing all about us and our dogs, because that's really where this conversation will go. So, Elatia, what is it about that resonates for you? Let's start there.
What resonates for me most is that everything we need is already right here. We spend so much time looking outside of ourselves. We spend so much time trying to find solutions outside of ourselves, and everything that we need to create, to invent, to build is right here. And the notions oftentimes that we believe or that we're told about how things are or how things should be or need to be, they just simply aren't true. And that's so exciting to me, because what if what's true and real is so much better, more exciting, more brilliant?
Yeah. Okay. I think we can all relate to this, that at some point in our lives or ongoing experiences, we get kind of hung up on that wheel, right? Where we're living into somebody else's reality, even our own, right? Our own expectation of, well, this is just who I am, and so this is the path that is mine to walk.
Yeah.
But what if that's not true? Is that what that's what you're saying? What if that's not at all true? Like, it couldn't be farther from the truth?
Exactly. And I'll tell the story that I told you just before we got online here. I immediately prior to this conversation, I went to a dance class. I'm in Manhattan today. I went to a dance class, and the people who were in the class, so this was at a gym, there were old senior citizens, there were men, there were women, and in fact, most people were pretty horrible dancers. So in terms of the technique that this amazing effervescent teacher was giving us, everybody was awful. But that room was full of smiling, jumping, laughing people, and people who, if you were to define them by their stereotypes, so the older women, maybe decrepit or shouldn't be out so much or should take it easy or rest or something. These women were pushing themselves to do hip hop dance moves that you would never expect, a 75-year-old Jewish grandmother to be doing. And there she was. And this man who is clearly sort of a man's man guy, they're jumping and grinning and laughing more and better than anybody else. And so this is very real expression of busting the stereotypes of how we are or how we should be, and allowing ourselves to live in a much more fun, exciting sort of a way.
I love that, right? This idea of, I like this example because it's an easy one for us to think about. Well, old people should do this and they should not do that.
Right.
Oh, says who?
Right.
Says who? I am an avid swing dancer. I'll keep going with the dancing analogy. I'm an avid swing dancer. I've been doing it for years and years. And it's a very social group, and they tend to be like, we all tend to know each other because we all go and have been doing this for years. So there's a gentleman that participates every single dance. He's got to be in his mid 80s now. And I adore him. I adore seeing him there, seeing him out on the dance floor. Is he moving as quickly as other people? No, but that doesn't matter, right? And we can get caught up in that comparison game too, that, well, I'm where I am, look at me, I'm this age, or I'm this ability, or I am degreed in this manner, right? I'm only qualified to do this, I'm not qualified to do that. Or, well, who would listen to me because I'm too young, or who would listen to me because I'm too old? It does, like, none of that actually matters. That's just completely made up inside of our heads.
Yeah, it's all made up inside of our heads. And what's so interesting to me, I ran a workshop for entrepreneurs here in New York some time ago. And we did this exercise around assumptions and busting assumptions about why we can or can't have what we want. And what was so interesting is that, the younger people are saying, I'm too young, and the older people are all saying, I'm too old. And they're actually able to use those assumptions of what's wrong with them or why they are incapable of doing things to their advantage. If they think about it, if you can use what seems to be a disadvantage, well, what if that's actually your strength? And so I love playing with assumptions. And I think that really speaks to this first section of the book, which is our assumptions about how the static way that things are, mm-hmm. as opposed to the dynamic possibility of what could be.
Yes. Yes, 1,000% yes. So probably one of my things, I want to piggyback on this idea of static. How many of us, like, give me a real life example, somebody on the call, but how many of us at some point or even today are living in a state of fixed, where we think that it's just the way I am. Oh, I'll give you an example. Yesterday I had lunch. Yes, Elatia knows. So I had lunch with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about his son, who is probably in his early 30s. And I'm not naming any names. I don't want to incriminate anyone, but this gentleman was telling me, oh, my son, he's such a slob. He's such a slob. When he would go out to eat at a restaurant, he'll clear his place and put his stuff up, but at home he won't. And I said, why do you suppose that is? He said, oh, it's just the way he is. I said, is that really true? Like, if that were true, then there are all sorts of things about me that should be showing up in the way that I live my life or keep my house or make or don't make my bed that aren't true, because I'm not fixed. We are not pre-wired or preconditioned. Anyway, there's no imprint on me or on anyone. And inside of, in the printed version on page 40, I just want to share something here. First, it says, your heart knows who you really are. And then you skip down a paragraph, said, lives of soaring action are described by action words. It was Buckminster Fuller who first observed, I seem to be a verb. And in that one powerful observation, he expressed a valuable secret of human potential. Owners of the spirit know that they are verbs, pure action words. Victims remain convinced that they are nouns, things, permanent things. But this thing called personality is merely an illusion. So start typing, guys. What do you think about that? This is, to me, I just like mind-blowing for me to wrap my head around that.
And how liberating that is too. So even just doing a simple inquiry and just asking yourself, so if this isn't the way I have to be, how else could I be? And playing with that in kind of on both ends of the spectrum, right? Like, what if, so let's say you never make your bed in the morning. Well, what would it be like if you made it every day or tried that out? What would that feel like? Or
what we just made it today.
Right. Or what would it feel like if instead of sleeping in a bed, you slept in a sleeping bag? Like, who knows? It's a weird example. But this notion that you can actually choose to do anything you want. Oftentimes people will come to me and say, oh, I'm unhappy at work and I don't know what to do about it. And they are shocked when I say to them, you actually have the option of quitting now. You don't ever have to walk back into your office. You could just send a text message from here.
We're not recommending it.
Right. I'm not recommending it, but to merely show that, like, that you actually could do that. That is an option you have. Now, whether you would or wouldn't, or the reasons why that's a good or bad idea, it's a kind of a whole other conversation.
Of course.
But you could. And in fact, I actually know somebody who sent in, it was Christmas break. She was on vacation. She hated her job and her boss so much, and she just decided that she was done. She mailed a letter and sent her computer back and never went to work again. So that kind of extreme is a possibility. And if you're unhappy at work, the other end is a possibility, which is, how could I become so incredibly engaged in what's happening here, regardless of my boss or of this or of that I'm just going to make it work? And then there's everything in between. So there's just so much more that can be created.
Yeah. And let's dig into that a little bit, because I think we've just given an example on two extreme ends of a spectrum, but there's everything in between that as well. So we think we get hung up on this idea. Well, I have to do it this way. Why? Stop, step back and ask, why do I? Is that true? Is that absolutely true? Is someone holding a gun to my head and saying, make your bed right now? And even then, you have some options. So what's possible? I think it's like we get into tunnel vision around what we think is supposed to happen, because we are hung up on ourselves as a noun, as this fixed entity, rather than simply being in constant motion action as the verb. And if we make just no other shift except that today, what's possible? So what is possible when we simply show up as a verb in action? Always. And every day I could be a different action verb today than I was yesterday. Again, if I think, well, I have to do it this way, again, then I'm falling back into noun mentality. I'm falling back into personality. Who's heard that or used that? Like, well, that's just my personality. That's just the way that I am. Really?
Yeah. And I think we've all used that. Right? You and I, of course, included. And when I was working in the corporate world, or even before that, when I was running nonprofits, oh, I'm just a nonprofit person. This is what I do. Well, then I moved over to the corporate world, and then that's what I did. And so there's just the possibility of change for all this other stuff.
Yeah. It's pretty exciting, actually, for me. And again, what we're suggesting is you don't have to do anything on either extreme. It's just where you are today, in what's possible, what can be different if you simply approach everything happening today as a verb rather than as a noun, saying, oh, maybe I'm not that way. Maybe that's not my person. Maybe I don't have a personality at all. Like, can we just toss out the personality? How does that feel? That feels very liberating to me to say, I don't like people who think they know me, like my brothers, for example, who think they Arminda is this what is that really, like, based on what?
And what I love about this, there's this really neat hidden thing under that, which is we already make shifts in our personnel, even when we think of ourselves as more static. This is just the way I am.
Mm-hmm.
We are constantly within this is just the way I am. We're making shifts. If you're a parent, you are one way with your children. You probably don't talk to them the way that you would, yell at somebody at the office, or so your personality at work and home might be different. Your personality at work and at church might be different, but you're still the same person. So we all have this ability to change, and we already know how to do it. So since we show up in different ways, so the way that I am with my grandmother is different than the way that I am with you, Arminda, is different than the way that I am with my brothers. So what if we could be better versions of that? We're already really adept at this. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that we're all already adept at this skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the example. Steve actually uses a similar example in the book when he says, here's how you know that you can do this, that you're already doing this. He said, hand somebody a baby.
Yeah.
That's it. Hand somebody a baby, and then instantly their voice changes, their entire demeanor changes, the way that they're interacting with this little human is suddenly completely different than interacting a moment ago with the adults in the room. That's being a verb. And that's all that it is. It's just simply, let me just try on something else. And conversely, what's the consequence when we don't do that? When we stay in this mentality, this fixed place of noun, of static being, Steve says that we then have I liked this a lot. He said we have a misplaced loyalty to our personalities. And that simply leads to misery and discomfort and sadness and frustration and stress and boredom, because we have this we think, well, this is the way that I am, and so we keep showing up inside of that personality it's made up anyway. I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Have you experienced that, or what do you think about that idea of a misplaced loyalty to a personality?
Well, that happens a lot with folks who I talk to, and even yesterday, I was speaking with a client who is getting ready for a huge project with her work. And she, on the one hand, she's saying, I have all this stuff to do. It's incredibly overwhelming. I don't know what to do next. Therefore, I'm not doing anything.
It's an option.
I'm watching Netflix for hours because I can't figure out what to do. And then we started playing the robot game, which is, okay, if you weren't nervous, if you didn't care, and if you just knew that you had to execute this task and you were a robot, and that robot was going to be able to tell you what the next task on the list was, you'd know what to do, wouldn't you? And of course, yes is the answer. And so then let's play robot. Let's be a robot and make sure so that we can make sure that all of this happens the way that you really want it to, and you don't get stuck watching Netflix instead of creating awesome in the world.
Yeah, I like playing the robot game. Sometimes I need that myself. Like it's good. It's good to have a tool like that. Say, okay, I'm just going to send the robot to do this today. And I like what Jazzy is saying, that this is like, we say things like, oh, they're just set in their ways, and we make excuses. We make excuses for someone's attachment to a personality. Yeah. In that sense, sometimes it's ourselves. We're just making an excuse. Well, I'm no good at that. And that can be very damaging. We could probably think up a list of things that we've seen or experienced personally, where if you stay attached to that, you're really doing self-harm, whether it's emotional, physical, mental. If we stay so attached to, well, this is just the way that I am. I know that I've experienced that with people that I know around me. Yeah.
And even beyond what you can create, it's the happiness that discovery brings, right? So change or different things that happen in our lives, what if we don't need to be afraid of it? What if there are wonderful new things to discover when that happens? I so often tell stories about my grandmother, and, at 89 years old, she was coming to New York and visiting me. When she was 85, she would fly to Brazil and come and stay with me for 2 weeks. And we'd go betting at the racetracks and do all kinds of stuff. She would go to the hardware store to pick up men at 85 years old. That's true story. And it worked for her.
That'll be a different webinar. Go on.
That's a whole other one. But if you were to say, an 85-year-old woman, she should just be resting and sleeping and not, doing anything. And here she is out in the world, taking Tai Chi, flying all over the place, continuing to expand her horizons. And I love that.
I love that. I was recently listening to something, who knows what it was, but they were talking about Okinawa. And, I know, I was reading the in-flight magazine on one of my flights, and there was this little blurb. I was like, what was that? Yeah, this in-flight blurb. But it said that Okinawa is known for its citizens' longevity. It's like the place in the world where people live the longest lives, well into their hundreds. And so they were interviewing a woman whose business she's essentially like an activity director for older people. And they were interviewing her, and she said, it's really different here. She's American. She says, really different here than in the States, where people retire to die. And she said, here people they're just getting started. They're just actively engaged in their own being, in their own existence. And I love that. I mentioned to Elatia earlier this distinction Steve mentions between a human being, right, action, and personality. Yeah. Personality is fixed. I'm retired. That's a personality. That's a fixed thing. I do Tai Chi. I dance. I go pick up men at the grocery store, whatever I do at age, whatever I am, right? That's being. I am being. I'm showing up and reinventing. Oh, that didn't work yesterday. So what can I do differently today? And this question, Emma, around fear is really critical, because I don't believe in fear. I don't believe it exists. Kind of like RUSs. I don't believe it exists. So let's read what Steve has to say about this, because I think this is really important to kind of process this. And he says that pay attention to your reactions to certain scenes in movies. Pay attention to your goosebumps and your tears. They come in response to courage and effort. They don't come in response to a scene in which someone is being comfortable. Pay attention to why you are choked up. It is your potential self trying to tell you something. It's the butterfly in your own cocoon. It wants out. And I made a note to myself that your physical reaction and or response to your life is your best indicator for your growth trajectory. Follow your goosebumps and your fear, because it's your potential self speaking. It's what's possible for you. Right when we get that experience or that sensation, it's that potential that's saying, let's do this, because we can make it up. Yeah. Elatia, what do you think about that?
Yes, I think, again, 1,000,000 times yes. And the exciting thing is, we as we get older, we get conditioned, so many of us, to inaction, to figuring out how to make things comfortable, to easy ways of doing things. And Steve mentions this in the book as well, sort of this notion of when he was, especially back when he was an addict and an alcoholic, and he was always looking for the easy way to do things. So I don't even need to read this business book. I can just have it by me and kind of take it in by osmosis.
Osmosis, yeah.
Which I was like, that's an interesting strategy.
I've tried it. It doesn't work.
So it hasn't worked for me. And Arminda knows this, and some of you on the call do. My major issue with self-help and with sort of the 10 easy steps and all of this stuff is that it's it's about comfort and laziness, and it implies that there's something wrong with us as we are, and that's just simply not the case.
Yeah, like we're inherently broken and we need to fix it.
Yeah, we're inherently broken, and then this notion of needing to work for something or wanting to create something, working hard, like that's a bad thing for some reason. And Steve addresses this in the book too. And what if instead of hard work being a bad thing or exhausting or horrible, what if instead it's building? What if it's creating? What if it's figuring stuff out and pushing your limits, whatever that might be? And that, to me, that's exciting. Being curious and then going out in the world to discover and create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have so many people on the call today who are doing extraordinary things in their world. And that's really inspiring and exciting. And what is it? Everybody has a different number for this. I'm going to call somebody out. I'm going to call Jazzy out on this. Jasmine is on the call right now. She is a remarkable young woman. And she has been training her voice for many, many years and will be attending Boston Conservatory in the fall. She's been given a full scholarship, full ride to attend Boston Conservatory. So I want to encourage everybody to find her online. She really is remarkable. But if we were to take Jazzy as one example of one person that's on the call today and say, Jazzy, did you just wake up one day and start singing and suddenly like you're wowing audiences and people are just coming from miles around to hear you sing? And the answer is no, right? It's taken you 10 years to be an overnight success, right? It's that idea that we think I am not fixed. I'm a verb every day and we're testing things. It's no different. Like you training your voice because you want to create that. You see yourself as a classically trained musician performing and singing and impacting lives with that gift. Great. But gifts need to be worked for, right?
Yeah.
Practice, right? Talent takes practice. It's not overnight. And so I'm creating that every day. I'm inventing that every day. I am verbing every day. I just made up that, right? I am verbing every day. I'm in action every day. I'm not a noun. I don't sit here if I were Jazzy saying, well, I'm a singer and do nothing. I'm not waiting for it to come to me. I am actively engaged in my own creation.
Yes. And it is, and I don't know where along the way we get lost and we think that things aren't this process of growth and practice. And it happened for so many of us. It certainly happened for me for a chunk of the middle of my career. And it's amazing. I was just speaking with a client yesterday, the same one who I referenced before, who is launching a business for the first time. And she's launching a clothing line. And so, as she's learning how to do the business side of things, we drew the parallel to her learning how to sew in the first place. Yeah. Right? So many years ago, it's not like she was born and knew how to sew and was an expert at it. And she may have had an inclination for it, but even stuff like design for her, she didn't learn how to design or draw until she was in graduate school. And here she is now creating a clothing line. So of course, the road to learning how to do the business side of things is going to be as clunky and bumpy and scrappy as, the first pair of pants that you try and sew. It's not going to be as good as the clothing line you're launching into the world, but there's no way to get to the clothing line without cutting that first pair of pants.
And it's a trial and error thing. It's testing. If Edison had given up at the beginning, right, when the first attempt, his first hypothesis failed, somebody else would have come along to invent, right, to come along and bring us the light bulb, right? It just it's hours and hours and days and years and sometimes of creating what we want, but none of us starts out with all the tools. We
Right.
acquire those along the way, because we are actively engaged in our own creation. And And I was just reading something that happened on this yesterday. I have old family daily journals, and I have an entry from when my daughter was very young. She was about 6 years old, and I was in a conversation with her. This is a different one, Elatia, that I didn't read to you yet. I was in a conversation with my mother and my daughter. So my daughter was around 6 at the time. And so I made this note. I'm going to read it off of this other screen here. Pardon my weird angle. So the three of us sat in the kitchen visiting with one another tonight. My mom shared several memories of her mother with us. One of the things she mentioned was that her mother taught herself how to sew, to cook, to knit, and to can food. After hearing that long list, my daughter exclaimed, "Wow, that's a lot. I only taught myself how to hula hoop."
That's fantastic.
So I just love this idea of what can we teach ourselves to do? Like, even if it's just hula hooping, that's something that's different, because now she can say, I hula hoop. I'm a verb when it comes to hula hooping. and practice is what leads to mastery, not the other way around.
Yes, practice is what leads to mastery. And one of the other interesting things is that the more you do this and the more you're in action and you try and you create, sometimes people get stuck by failure, whatever that means. And folks know that Arminda and I don't really believe in that as a concept. But some people stop themselves. So there's, particularly when you have a vision for something you want to create in the world, you'll often stop yourself because your first few attempts don't match the vision of what you have.
Yes.
So you just say, oh, forget it. And that's exactly the point where...
And we say right then, we say, I'm not cut out for this.
Exactly. We say, I'm not cut out for this. And I'll tell you, when I first went into business for myself as a coach, I had all these visions about how things are supposed to be and how fantastic they are. And I'm going to be so good at it the way that I was, when I was in the corporate world doing what I had been doing for years. The very first webinar that I did was really not good, especially compared to what I'm creating now and the polish that I've done since I've done it so many times. But if you go, and it's online somewhere with the university where I did it, so it's actually out there in public, but it's a great example of, if I were to watch that and say, oh, this isn't exactly what I want it to be, so I'm just going to set it aside now, instead of pushing through and saying, okay, what can I take from what I learned there? Or what can I learn from what I did there, and take it and refine and improve and move forward? And so that's the second place where we get stuck, right? There's the actual failure of things. So then we stop and say, oh, this is just the way things are. This is how I am. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. Or we start creating and we say, oh, it's not as good as so-and-so's example. It's not as good as what I'm envisioning for myself, so I'm going to stop also.
I think these are deadly traps. I really think that exactly what you're just describing, who among us has not fallen victim to that idea. And this idea that, first of all, that we compare ourselves to what somebody else is doing because it's similar to our own path. Guess what? My path is my own. There's nobody else on my path. It is only mine to create. It is, and I'm laying it brick by brick. And as soon as we get caught up in that comparison, vicious comparison cycle, as Jazzy is saying, it happens way too much. But what if we just stop that? What if we just said, actually, the comparison, I think when we do that, that's us being a noun. That's us being fixed. That's us in static mode rather than us in creation mode. Recognizing, okay, that didn't work out. How can I simplify that? How can I, let me back up? And it's like putting the car in reverse when we get stuck in a ditch. You got to put it in reverse, and you got to put some traction under the back wheel, and then go backwards, and then just a slight variation with the wheel to go in a different direction. See if it can be that simple. But when we get stuck And we just spin that wheel. And then finally we just, what are you going to do? Leave the car there and say, oh, well, it's just not meant to be. No, I'm going to drive this car. I'm going to make this happen. Yeah. So really, really important not to compare ourselves. And I really want to look at this thing around fear too. Again, coming back to fear isn't real. Fear is made up. Fear is forgetting that everything is all right. And fear is also that inside person, right? Your inside potential. I get so excited and animated about this, but there is nobody on this planet that knows you and your potential better than you. No one. And so when you think it's fear, I want you to just stop and say, is this fear or is this me saying, let's do this thing? Because I really think that's what fear is. It's fear saying, oh, okay, we can do this. This is exciting. We're going to work. It's time to grow. It's time to be in action rather than sit back and be comfortable. Get uncomfortable, people. Like get up, get out, get moving, get being. Be.
Just be. I love that. I love that. Fear is often the sign that you're going in the right direction. Fear is often, this is the door I need to be going through. If I'm afraid of this, and this is the exact thing that I need to be doing. And I love that. It makes it, and learning this notion of fear of being bad, fear is a bad thing, is also a story that we buy, which I love what you're saying, that fear isn't real. Fear is a made up story about an outcome that may or may not be true at some point in the future based on our limited ability to imagine stuff, no matter how spectacular our imaginations are. So what if there's much better there already?
Yeah. And let's talk for just a minute about future-based fear. Fear lives in the future. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely agree with it, because fear is not the action or the occurrence or what's happening now. It's what we imagine will happen if a whole series of other things happen that's bad for us in some way, shape, or form. But that's all based on an imagination of some future event.
Yeah, that doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist.
Right. The only thing that is real is right now. So I'm either in action right now, or I'm comfortable allowing a fear of something that doesn't exist in the future to paralyze me.
Right.
I think that's pretty much it. Those are your options. So you can be that noun, you can be static and say, I'm too afraid that it's not going to work out. I'm too afraid that I'm not cut out for this. I'm too afraid that nobody's going to like me. I'm too afraid that I don't have what it takes to start my own company. I'm too afraid that I'm not wired the way that you're wired. I'm like, what is that?
And the grand irony of that is, the more you are in action, the more you're out of action because you are afraid, that inaction is actually creating the outcome that you don't want.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So instead of getting into action to create, or getting into action to, even at its very sort of base, prevent a negative outcome that you want, by remaining static and in fear, you create the self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the great irony of it. It
is the great irony of it. Let's go back to Greek tragedies, or not. But here's like when you think about that, this is exactly what Steve is talking about when he's referencing misplaced loyalty to a personality. It leads to that self-fulfilled prophecy that I'm a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Failure is as failure does, or doesn't do,
or doesn't do, as the case may be.
As the case may be. So if I am so attached to my personality as incapable of doing or being something, where are your loyalties? That's the sad part. Like, really, like, kind of dial that back in and say, well, who am I showing up for today? Am I showing up for a personality that I invented to begin with, or am I showing up for me, for that feeling inside of, like, wow, like, what did Aubrey say? It's fear shows that you're alive. Yes, it's an indicator of our very aliveness, of our very ability to be human, to being, showing up, being in action. When we ignore that, when we just simply stay comfortable, then we're saying to the personality, you win. You win. I'm not going to be anything.
Right. We say that you win, and we also say that we don't, what we're telling ourselves is that we don't deserve something better. This is all that we are supposed to have, that we can have. And why is it that we believe in these diminished versions of our own potential? Now, I refuse to, and I'm, practicing with my own self and with my clients, I don't believe in the diminished version of anybody's story about themselves. Oftentimes, and especially with folks who have already created a lot in the world, and they find themselves hitting a wall, I say, why are you playing so small? I don't care what you've created to date. That's, if living in that, unless tomorrow's your last day on earth, that's a very diminished version of what your potential is. So what if there's more in there? What else could you uncover and create and be?
Or just invent? It doesn't even just invent it, make it up.
Yes.
I think that's the whole idea. It's reinventing. It's being something that you aren't currently.
Yeah.
So what do you want to be? And let's make that happen.
Yeah, after the very first time I read Reinventing Yourself, I thought, okay, so what am I going to do with this book? How am I going to actually bring it to fruition in my life in some way, shape, or form? And what I decided to do is I took a calendar, I made a calendar of my next week, and had a whole series of things that I needed to get done. And every day was a different kind of activity. One day I needed to be on the phone. One day I needed to be doing research. And so for each day of the week, I was either super entrepreneur savvy, pitching person, Silicon Valley persona, or I was incredibly studious, have my glasses on all day, taking notes, doing reading. And it was so fun to approach the week and realize that literally every day, and if I wanted to be crazy about it, I could have split down chunks of hours, but I just decided to take on a persona for every day to get stuff done. And not only did I get done what I needed to do, but it was a way more entertaining way of getting my work done. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I know for me, in the past, I could get really, I use this phrase, hung up in the weeds of my personality, or hung up in the notion that I slow down in the afternoons. Really? Okay. Or, I don't really like to cold call. Okay. Or I don't do computer stuff. I'm not very tech savvy. I'm really tech savvy. So what, but we get that in our heads, and to your point, sometimes it just takes a little jolt or a jab or a webinar to say, where am I fixed? If we just take a big picture snapshot of our day or our world and say, in what areas of my life, because I think we can be very much a victim in one area of our life and an owner, a total boss in another area. So I don't think everybody is all one time. So that would be one thing that I would encourage you to do, is to say, if I'm just kind of doing a self-analysis of myself as a victim versus an owner, in what areas do the victim flags start, waving? And look at that and say, okay, what could I do differently there? How could I show up differently? How could I be a verb in that area, instead of just simply buying into the misunderstanding that I can't be anything different than I am?
Yeah. And even, within those various structures of your personality. So let's say you're a total boss at work, literally and figuratively, and at home in your personal relationships, you allow yourself to be a victim. So even playing the game of, how could I be more like I am at work at home, or vice versa? How could I be this stronger version of myself in in various aspects of my life and just see.
Yeah. And guess what? Just put the hypothesis out there, because it's all just one big experiment. Inventing, like I think of, okay, if I'm an inventor, what kid doesn't want to fancy themselves an inventor when they are little? They've got all these inventions and ideas. What if we just look at, that's literally what we want to do with ourselves. If I'm inventing a new version or a better or an improved or completely different version of me, what does she look like? She's a total boss, like total superhero. What does she look like? And how does she show up in these different areas? And you don't have to do everything at once, but just test some hypotheses and have fun with it. Like Elatia was saying, her example of putting out a calendar and actually marking on the day. For me, I know most of you have seen this. I show it back basically every webinar. This is on my bulletin board. It's my question that I ask myself every day. It's right in front of me. What will you create today? That's the only thing I need to know. That's the only question I need to ask myself ever. Because then I just go create something. I go invent something and it's just fun. It's a game.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I was in a conversation with some folks who are two guys who are kind of at the top of their field and getting toward the end of their careers. And I was asking them about what's on their bucket lists, what still would be left to do. And both of them said, gosh, this kind of opportunity at this company, only that the guys who are running this company said that they're not going to hire anybody from outside of it. So I guess that's not possible for us in our bucket list. And I said, really? Said, so how many years do you have before you're at the end of what you're doing right now? Oh, 5 years. I said, so you're telling me that there isn't a chance between now and the next 5 years that this company isn't going to change its policy? Like, I refuse to believe in your limited versions of yourselves. And look at the bill of goods you're selling yourselves. You're talking about a future. You're knocking stuff off of your bucket list based on a hypothesis of something that may or may not happen 5 years down the road.
Completely. It's ridiculous. Like, it's laughable. Guys, laugh at yourselves because what you're doing is funny. and this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Steve in the chapter called Dying Inside Your Comfort Zone. He says this: owners focus on what they want. Victims focus on what they fear. And both positions are pure internal invention.
Yeah. So it's with the option, why not focus on the more exciting things? And the other notion, this might be the third thing that's fantastic to me about the book, the third of many, which is this notion that it takes as much energy to think about the victim stuff and to not create as it does to think about the owner stuff and being in creation. And to take that one step further, it takes as much energy to think about doing something small as it does to take, to do something huge.
Yes.
So, since we're expending this energy anyway, and we are, why not expend it in something that's fulfilling? Because we have that choice. We really do.
We do. And I want to address, this came up, I found this, I think this could be helpful, a little tool that Steve recommends and that we fully endorse from the book, because it can be scary. And I don't think either one of us wants to diminish that, especially when we've been buying into the misunderstanding that fear is real. It's going to take some practice to get past that, to where we are no longer limiting ourselves or our future potential selves because of what we have been mislabeling as fear up until now. So what's the workaround for that? And Steve says, talk to yourself, start thinking about it, practice saying, I can do that every time you see someone do something great. That's it. It's because, and he goes, let me keep going. He says, most people say, wow, I could never do that. And they've built that deep neural pathway with that negative affirmation. By saying, I could never do that, they deepen the illusion that they are stuck in something mediocre, that they are stuck in someone mediocre. But you can set yourself free. You can change all of that. The greatness that you see in others It exists in you. And here's the beautiful thing. You would not be able to see it in someone else if it did not exist in you.
Yeah, and I love that. And that's another reason why I love stories of older people engaging in new things, because it just knocks down the preconceived notion that there comes a moment in our lives when we stop doing stuff. You know, these great stories that Steve references of people becoming actors very late in life, or even at some point in the story, I think it's in the second section, but when he talks about Elizabeth Taylor and her, you know, getting married because she keeps so many times because she's looking for happiness outside of herself. And she changes that late in life after all of the many marriages that she has. So there's always this opportunity. It's never too late to try something new. And Arminda, can you believe it? We are 3 minutes away from the top of our hour.
I know. That's the unbelievable thing. This has happened again. You guys let us talk on and on. Can I end with a quote?
Bring it.
From one of my favorite poets that Steve quotes is William Butler Yeats. He says, "Happiness is neither this nor that. Happiness is growth. We are happy when we are growing." Thank you, Mr. Yeats.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Guys, was this helpful? What are you going to do differently? What's your new hypothesis? Tell us in the chat. What's going to change because of today? Be the boss. Go, Emma.
Be the boss. I love that. I love it. Thank all of you for being here. Go out into the world, experiment, try something new and interesting, and join us in 2 weeks for our next 3-part What If webinar series. You can find the links to that on our website, whatifamazing.com, because what if amazing. And we really hope to see all of you there. Thanks for coming and sharing the love with us today. Thanks, Arminda.
All right. Thanks, Elatia. Bye.
Bye, guys.